Unseen Angels. The true life story of Aleksandra, Mikhailovna, Safronova, Graybeal, as related to Ronnie L. Graybeal. Written July 1997. A foreword by Richard W. Doudt.
Our precious freedoms. Dear reader, I would like to try to relate to you an experience I will not soon forget. It would open the eyes of and touch the heart and soul of every God-fearing individual who calls himself an American. I, like too many of us, have gotten used to the good life we enjoy here in the United States. I have fallen into the habit of taking things for granted, things that are far too precious to be taken for granted. I am referring to our freedoms of speech, religion, and press. Being the bicentennial, this may be an appropriate time to renew these ideals, which we have wrongfully allowed to become commonplace, and to give special thanks for what we have. Ironically, it was a lady not native to the United States who brought me to my senses and made me realize how truly marvelous it is to be an American. This wonderful lady, who made such a deep impression on me, was the guest speaker at a Robins Air Force Base Better Management Association's meeting held on February 24, 1976 at the Officers Club. Her name is Mrs. Aleksandra Safronova Graybeal, and for 3/4 of an hour she held the audience spellbound as she related to us the story of her life, from the awful horrors she experienced in the Soviet Union as a girl to the wonderful joy she has known in America. She was born and raised during the Russian Socialist Revolution and fully realizes the terrible destructive force of communism. She went through personal hardship and tragedy as the communist machine slowly took over everything her family owned. They started by taking bits and pieces of her father's 10-acre farm and ultimately took their last source of nourishment, a small sack of corn. Mrs. Graybeal suffered through Nazi prison camps during World War II and only managed to eventually arrive in America through a quirk of fate. She was hospitalized during the time the other Russian prisoners were being shipped from Germany back to Russia at the close of the war, and as a result of her hospitalization, she missed out on the mass exodus. She arrived in America after marrying Mr. Ronnie Graybeal, an American soldier stationed in Germany. The pain, recalled as she related her story, was evidenced by her dabbing of tears from time to time. I was close to dabbing a few of my own as I listened to her, and I'm sure many others in the room were moved as well. The point I'm trying to make is that we should all be grateful to be living in America, for there are far too many other places in the world where we would not have the opportunity to write a letter such as this one, expressing oneself as freely as I have. I would like to personally thank this great and wonderful lady for opening this American's eyes, and I can honestly say that her coming to America was Russia's loss and America's gain. May God bless you, Mrs. Graybeal. Richard W. Doudt, 3471 O'Hara Drive, North Macon, Georgia.
Preface. We think you will find this to be an unusual and a timely story. Unseen angels are just as real as those that can be seen. What started out to be a true life story of Soviet Ukrainian-born Aleksandra Mikhailovna Safronova Graybeal, written only for her children, grandchildren, and future generations, has actually become a story that should not be kept from the world. The world needs to be more aware of how help often comes from heavenly sources and how our Heavenly Father watches over His children here on earth. The story is timely because of events happening right here in our own country and what is happening in the former Soviet Union. Alexandra sees some very alarming things now going on here in America that she witnessed under communism, and it worries her. Having been raised under communism, she can see clearly those things that we might be venturing into that we will regret later. Perhaps her story will help those who read it to awaken to reality. Alexandra could have been any young girl living in the former Soviet Union prior to and during World War II, except for the fact that there were just too many unusual events in her life. Events that demand we set her apart as a witness of two major historical atrocities: the Ukrainian Black Famine and the Second World War. In the early 1930s, Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, led by a dictator named Joseph Stalin. Stalin wanted total control over everyone, so he decided to take over all the farms. The Black Famine in Ukraine during the 1930s refers to the Holodomor, which means death by hunger, a catastrophic man-made famine engineered by Joseph Stalin's Soviet regime. It occurred primarily in 1932 to 1933 and was a direct consequence of forced collectivization policies aimed at dismantling Ukrainian peasant resistance and consolidating Soviet control. The event remains a controversial historical issue, with Ukraine and many countries recognizing it as a deliberate political weapon against its population. Renowned historian of Soviet history, Robert Conquest argued that the Holodomor was a deliberate act of genocide. His book, The Harvest of Sorrow, 1986, is foundational in framing the famine as a state-engineered atrocity. However, the author of this writing is a first-hand witness to this tragedy, and as such, it is the context of her life story, and is the basis of her opinions about communism and socialism. As she will attest, farmers lost everything. The government forced Ukrainian farmers to give up their land and animals to the state. This messed up farming, so less food was grown. No food, no escape. Even when crops failed, the government took all the remaining food, so much that people had nothing left to eat. They sealed the borders and restricted travel, so starving families couldn't leave to find help. Millions died. People starved to death. Some resorted to eating things they never should have, and many died of diseases from malnutrition. Historians estimate between 3 to 10 million people died, mostly in Ukraine. Why? It wasn't an accident. Stalin did this to punish Ukrainians for resisting his control and to crush their culture and independence. It's seen by many as a genocide, a crime where a group is targeted for destruction. Think of it like a bully taking someone's lunch money every day until they starve, but on a massive government level. It's a dark part of history that shows how dangerous unchecked power can be. People remember it today to honor those who suffered and to prevent such tragedies from happening again. When Alexandra was born in 1924, the economy of the entire Soviet Union was in chaos, and food was already in scarce supply. The large farmers, the kulaks, who were the real experts in farming, had mostly been killed off by the communists. This left people trying to farm who didn't have the expertise to produce food in large quantities. All of this led to farms being collectivized and brought under control of the communist government. Collectivization was to come about in 1928 as a part of the first 5-year plan. Even then, it took years to get production of food up to an acceptable level, but the cities had to be fed. This left severe shortages of food in the countryside and in the small villages. Alexandra's family had to face starvation conditions daily, and much of their time was occupied in collecting enough food for the family just to survive. In the early years of Alexandra's life, she often witnessed men lying on the sidewalk in the last throes of death from starvation. Throughout her young life, she experienced fear of not having enough to eat. The communist government, in its zeal to bring all small farms under collectivization, unduly taxed the people and would physically take from them their last pound of grain as payment. This actually happened to the Safronova family, and it was at a time when there was nothing else in the house to eat. Alexandra's father, Mikhail, had a small farm of about 10 acres, and he didn't want it to be taken into the collectivization system. Therefore, the family was taxed until the communists got their cattle, their horses, and finally their farm. This was the communist method of coaxing one to voluntarily place his farm into the system. You will feel Alexandra's pain as you travel with her on foot and alone for more than 500 miles across the frozen plains of Russia during the dead of winter at the age of 17. She had to pass through enemy territory where, catching anyone out after dark, they would shoot first and ask questions later. Naturally, I have repeated certain points in this preface that have already been made in her story. Let's go now to her story, and let her tell you in her own words.
Introduction. I am writing and releasing this story at this particular time for two main reasons. First, I am writing it for my posterity. I want them to know their roots and to understand about unseen angels as actual beings. Secondly, I love America, and I feel so badly for what I see happening in its political system. I saw much of the same thing in the Soviet Union. I am now watching the birth of the third generation since coming to the United States in 1947, and inch by inch, I see the country drifting towards socialism, which eventually leads to communism. The communists took power in Russia by promising the people the same socialistic schemes that our American politicians are trying, perhaps in good faith, to foist upon the American people even at present time. I will not need to pinpoint the different schemes that I see as extremely harmful, but in my story, you will see how I lived under and experienced the evils of communism. I hope you will never have to experience what the Soviet peoples had to experience for over 75 years, and of which they are now trying to rid themselves of. My story could be that of most any young Russian or Ukrainian girl except for several experiences that not too many young girls would have had. Many of us went through the same things prior to World War II, and many of us had similar war experiences. But few would have walked over 500 miles across the frozen plains of Russia, not once, but twice, one of these alone at the age of 17. Few would have hidden out in the woods for 4 months, not once, but twice. Once in northern Russia, and the other in Nazi Germany. This time in Germany. Once again, I was alone. Or, at least I thought I was alone. Again, few non-Jews would have spent 3 months in a Nazi concentration camp at Dachau. Few would have lost complete contact with all family members for more than 13 years. World War II brought much misery to many of us, but it also brought much joy. Or should I say that much joy and happiness grew out of World War II, for me at any rate. You will understand why as you get into the story, and see for yourself how unseen angels watched over me. Go with me back to the time period of 1923 to 24. This is a critical time period in my life. World War I had passed. American troops had long since returned home. President Warren G. Harding had died in 1923, and his vice president, Calvin Coolidge, had assumed the office of president and was in office when I was born. In Russia, the communist revolution had taken place, and their leader, Vladimir Lenin, had died in 1924. He was succeeded by a ruthless character by the name of Joseph Stalin, a shoemaker's son and one-time seminary student. He was to rule the Soviet Union with an iron fist, all during my life in the Ukraine, and until his death in 1953. In the Republic of the Ukraine in the village of Konsky Razdori, Zaporozhye Oblast, province, just north of the Black Sea, lived the Safronova family. My parents, Mikhail and Hannah, and my 2 sisters, Anna, born 1916, and Maria, born 1920. Papa Mikhail had lost a leg in World War I, and life wasn't easy for him and the family. But somehow they had to make room for one more. Me. After all, when I arrived in the world on 22nd March 1924, all I wanted was a little milk and a clean diaper once in a while. Economics and hard times didn't mean much to me then, and wouldn't for a few years.